welcome back to Shoot Punch Kick, where three former Brooklyn gangbangers talk 80s and 90s cinematic violence. I'm Telly, joined as always by my fellow former street soldiers, Carlos and Dash. What's up, guys?
What's going on? It's been a while since I've been in the gangbang, I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be fun to just get more hyperbolic with these introductions, you know?
Nice.
I'm just following your
like
leads.
it.
That's definitely going to help on the searching algorithm, on our search optimization. Dope.
Bro.
All right. Well, today is a very special episode because we're going to be flashing back to 1986, no pun intended, to break down the cult classic and one of my favorite goddamn movies of all time, Highlander. Not Highlander, but Highlander. Directed by Russell Mulcahy, starring Christopher Lambert, not Lambert, but Lambert,
Christopher Lambert,
Sean
man.
Connery, and Clancy Brown. So quickly, Carlos, let's talk about personal histories with the movie. What's yours?
Personal history with the movie. This was a movie I was completely mad about when I was a kid. My uncle, once again, same story. He kind of put me onto it. Just the concept
You had a good
of
uncle, man. He was like,
I know,
yeah,
right?
good stuff. I don't want to tell you what happened to me and my uncle, but yeah.
Whoa.
Okay.
So yeah, anyway, I really loved the movie coming up. Then the second one kind of came out, and I think I was really disappointed in it, and I kind of lost my interest in the franchise. But then surprisingly enough, a few years later, I started really liking the TV show. And that kind of brought me back into the Highlander fold. And I was obsessed again for a little bit. I've always loved this movie, but to be fair, I probably haven't seen it in 15 to 20 years.
Oh, goddamn. Okay.
Yeah. I'll say the same. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't seen it for a while, but for me, Highlander was it was always around, but not that it was like this big cultural event, but there was already the show by the time I was like 8 years old, and then by the time I saw it, it was already had a sequel, had a show that was on, and it was one of the better shows of the similar type shows. So it was like Hercules, Renegade with Lorenzo Lamas. There was like all types of weird shows. Shout out to
Guys
Mantis.
with long hair and ponytails during that
Yeah,
period.
but I would say like Mantis broke that mold. But Highlander I just felt like was always around. I don't remember when I first saw it, but I do remember rewinding the tape to see when they switched the body from the actor to like the dummy head for the first the first decapitation. So I just feel like this franchise has always been in my life.
I remember going to the video store and always seeing that box. And I think it was just a picture of like Christopher Lambert holding a sword, and the box intrigued me because I was like, "What's a Highlander?" And never bothered to rent it. And then when the second one came out, I remember seeing the trailer, and it was like a Blade Runner kind of futuristic thing. And this was like 1991. I was watching everything. That was the summer of T2. I was going to theater, watching everything. And I remember I didn't see it in theater, but I remember seeing the poster, and I rented it on VHS. And I was like, oh, this is like fun. And then I went back and saw the first one, because it happened to be on TV, and I'm like, these are two completely different movies.
Yeah.
And but I did fall in love with the first one actually after I watched it from beginning to end. Can't say I'm a big fan of the show. I think all the sequels are pretty terrible, but the first one is a true classic, and let's get into it.
I just want to make a point out message that I think it's kind of funny. The Highlander is such a cool name, but it really doesn't bear too much with he does come from the Highlands, but it's not like it's a thing that, propels his character in any particular direction. It just sounds cool. And then it's, it's a dude with a sword, and it sounds cool on there.
How
and I was
about the
looking at
name?
it too. And some of those shots where he was living, yes, there were mountains around him, but they were all in the basins. So it almost kind of felt like he was a lowlander.
Oh.
But I digress. I'm sorry, continue.
That doesn't have the same ring to it.
Yeah. Questioning his land,
be a good name for
his
a car
land
either.
identity.
Yeah, but let's get into Highlander. For those of you that haven't seen it, I don't know why the hell you're watching this podcast, but here's a synopsis from ChatGPT. Highlander follows Connor MacLeod, an immortal Scottish warrior born in the 16th century, who discovers he is part of a race of immortals locked in a battle to the death. The only way to kill one is by beheading, and when only one remains, they receive the mysterious prize. The movie alternates between modern-day New York and flashbacks to various periods of Connor's life. So there's your synopsis in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And just some little bit of background before we dive in. Highlander came out on March 7th, 1986.
Mhm.
It was a time when sword and sorcery films were really popular. I think Conan, Beastmaster, all that stuff. And then also
Very nice.
the influence of MTV really started to seep into popular culture. Russell Mulcahy was a music video director before he made this film. And then obviously Queen composed the soundtrack, and we're going to talk a lot about that. But Dash, your just initial reactions after watching it for the first
Just,
time in a long time.
just fucking holding up and just awesome. Like in terms of the visual, the story, is like, all right, it's not going to be what we expected from a lot of like fantasy stuff now with these like really deep mythologies and lores and stuff, but the lore in Highlander is fucking awesome. So yeah, watching it was great. It was. There's been some of the movies that we watched lately that just completely had a different just didn't measure up to what it was in my head, but this one I can say definitely did.
Carlos?
So a funny thing happened to me rewatching this movie. So I watched it twice. The first time I watched it, I had the same uncle over. Actually, funny enough, last weekend he came over with my grandmother, who also likes watching an occasional action movie. She's not adverse to seeing some swords flying. And I saw it with them together. First time I had seen it again in like 20 years. And it didn't go over really well, surprisingly.
For you?
And I think it for all of us.
Oh.
I think that part of it is when you're watching it with other people, and then other people want to start talking kind of over it and talking about what happened to them that day. Now you're not really watching it. You're only kind of watching snippets of it, and it feels really disjointed to the point at which, at one moment, I think it was the scene where Connor is finally kissing the police lady. That she just looks over and she goes, "This movie really sucks, man." And it was
man,
not
heresy.
a great. It was not a great watch. But then I watched it again this morning because I didn't take notes that time. I like to take notes while watching this stuff for the pod. And I watched it by myself, and I loved it. It was a completely different experience. And so two things I will say. I think one is that it seems like a lot of times these movies our reactions to them are affected by our expectations. So the first time I went to see this last Saturday, I expected it was going to be great, and I was totally disappointed. And then watching it again this morning, I was expecting it was going to be terrible, and it was great. Right? So I think some of it, and I think the other thing is, it's the audience that you watch it with, right? Like, that'll really affect your enjoyment of a movie. I guess you just vibe off the people that you're watching it with, and if they're not vibing with it the same way that you are, then you won't either. I think the same thing happened. I watched Ghost Dog with my mom, and she didn't really like it, and I remember loving it, and so conversely, I didn't really enjoy watching it that time. So
one thing that I'm finding with some of these is just that with whoever's making the movie, sometimes they have like such a different point of view of like some seem like a joke, right? Like it's tough to. I would say that this movie takes itself way more serious than Maniac Cop or like Avenging Force, and it's getting one thing that's like kind of tough, especially for some of these movies that I haven't seen for a while. Some of them I'm remembering seriously. Like I remember before we put on Tango and Cash, I would have thought like this movie had no humor, like just from what I thought it would be. And watching it, they wanted to be Lethal Weapon, it wanted to be, Last Boy Scout. Where this one I remembered it being serious, and it was serious.
Yeah.
It's just whether you buy it.
Well, it's funny because the older I get, I realize how much camp is also intentional. Camp is in the movie with like the Kurgan driving around the street with in the car with the old lady screaming and all that. And also, I mean that the Clancy Brown is really hamming it up, but there are also dead serious and extremely emotional moments in the movie, which is also just there's so many peaks and valleys, which I think really gives it a full experience. And with that point, I wanted to talk about the story because both of you alluded to it. And I think this story, and especially this movie, is meant to be watched alone because it is so engrossing. There's so much going on and happening, and also to put your head into the character of Connor McLeod. It's something you want to watch by yourself, and I think the ideal way to watch this is probably in an empty movie theater, at like 10 o'clock at night. But movie theaters, what are those? But let's talk about the story, because Dash, you mentioned that the mythology and everything. It what's amazing about this movie from 1986? It all fits in one movie. It's not stretched out over like a trilogy it was stretched out into sequels, but that wasn't part of the original plan. And do you think that could actually work anymore? Because I know there's been talk about trying to remake this movie and turn it into a trilogy. Do you think that will work, or do you think this is just meant to be one movie, self-contained film?
I think it was intended to be that, and it works on that. And I think that's like with so many movies, especially ones from back in the day, they hold up as just like really good stories. Some of them have been expanded to franchises, but they have a beginning, middle, and end. When they try to redo it now, there's going to be Easter eggs of shit that's going to lead into someone else. You're going to wait. There's going to, they'll add another character who you're going to expect to turn in the second one. And, every one of these, it's almost like watching a show in the first season. Like, you can't really just judge it as its own complete entity, where I think this one just works as a perfectly standalone movie, was intended most likely to be a standalone movie, and just really has all of that lore packed into one story.
I think what's interesting again about this movie is everyone gets, when you talk to fans of the film, everyone sort of gets something different from it. Because the story is so rich. And Carlos, what resonates with you? I'm curious.
I mean, I think it kind of already speaks to some of the things that I've liked in the sword and sorcery genre already. These people are immortal, but it also has like a current tone to it too. Like, they've been living through history. One thing that really resonated a lot with me is if you have this really cool concept about these people who are immortal and all the lives that they've lived. I think in a lot of other movies, especially when you're trying to make it a short, it's not meant to be a franchise, they would have just basically told you, I've lived 1,000 different lives, and I've been these 5 different people, and you might get it in somebody reading a book. Oh, looks, this person has appeared here and there. But I really enjoyed the way that in this movie you get a chance to see him throughout different periods in history in the flashbacks. Because it lends to, it lets me believe more that these people have knowledge, have experience above and beyond just your kind of regular character in a movie. And it really builds out that mythos you were talking about. And the fact that they managed to get it into one movie is great. But conversely, it also led to, I think, why it was such a great television show. Because now you have, you can continuously, you have 300 years worth of lifestyle that you could put this character in Japan. You could put him in World War II. You could put him in the Crusades. You can put him in all these different places. And it lends to building the character. So, I mean, I think as far as something that really stuck out to me, and what resonated with me in the story, aside from just cool sword fights, the idea that every time these swords clash, they spark. And guys being picked up, is just the idea that you got to see who this person was throughout history. And, normally what could have been a real cheesy love arc about being afraid to being in love really gets expressed because you see the multiple loves throughout his life and how that's caused him, trauma. Even though I would argue I didn't really feel a lot of chemistry between Christopher Lambert and that police chick. But
totally agree.
Not at all.
Totally agree. And for me, I might have mentioned this earlier, but I'm like, sword and sorcery is probably one of my least favorite genres. And for one reason or another, this film really resonates with me because I think there's a kind of a horror element to it as well. Like, you could basically make Connor McLeod into a vampire. And it could be the same story. You could make the immortals into vampires, and it could play out in the same exact way. So I think it sort of touches that part, and then also just the idea of like all these lives and reincarnation is also something I used to be extremely fascinated with when I was a teenager. But let's get into the cast and the performances. This is without a doubt, I think, Christopher Lambert's signature role. Maybe if you ask someone a little bit younger than us, they'll say Raiden. But I think hands down, he is Connor McLeod. I don't. Maybe Dash agrees. Yeah. But to me, he'll always be Connor McLeod. And I think the movie really sits on his shoulders because he has to carry the. I mean, he's in virtually every scene.
Hmm.
But Dash? What do you think of Lambert's performance? Because it's kind of
Uh,
it's also a bit of an odd performance as well with the weird accents because you have a French guy playing a Scottish guy and he's
yeah.
got this like nondescript accent. But yeah, thoughts on Lambert overall,
Uh,
even as an actor?
a little weird, and I think like I like I know I don't want this criticism. I loved him in the role, but like for some of it too, like you seen him sucking titties by like the end of
Mhm.
by the end of this movie. And like that, you know, there's a reason why we're not buying that love story, right? Like we're buying him in certain aspects. The movie tries to do a lot of stuff, tries to have this like, you know, love theme throughout time, which is like a really
Mhm.
tough sell, which he definitely didn't do, in my opinion. But in terms of like, he was Highlanding, like you know, he like in the scenes where he had like a sword fight going on, like selling the mythos, switching in between these like different roles. I thought it was cool. I thought it was a little like out of place feeling in that World War II flashback. He didn't seem
Hmm.
like, I think because he had that like specific ethnic direction, he didn't come across as what I believe like a Highlander, the idea of it is, right? Like someone who goes through time. Like when you think about the vampires, they have like the people who are like the aristocrats and they've like existed in
Mhm.
high society throughout and they adapt. Like he definitely didn't seem like someone who adapted. Like some of the things that he was doing didn't seem to match. Like, you know, him as an art dealer, I didn't buy. Like I bought him as a Highlander, but not a lot of the other story
Mm.
aspects. But I can't picture this movie being not him.
I also the Christopher Lambert thing is kind of funny to me because he's one of these guys who, watching a lot of him in other roles and everything else that he's done, I don't think he's necessarily a good actor. I think he's just charismatic, and so you enjoy watching him in pretty much everything that he does. I'm a big fan. However, I don't think that he's necessarily a good actor. He's trying to pick her up. I found it in one scene where he's following the police lady, and they wind up in actually one of my favorite dive bars, Peter McManus, over on 19th Street and like 6th Ave. And I guess he tries to pick her up, and it was without a doubt the least smooth thing. Right? He just kind of mumbles to her, "You ever been to
Mhm.
Madison Square Garden?"
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then she
Yeah.
comes over, and she's like, "What do you want?" I want to walk you home. And he like looks at her kind of funny, and then she walks away. It just I didn't buy any of.
Just
I
a
get
straight up predator. Like
Yeah,
kind
well,
of.
I mean, yeah, that scene doesn't quite make much sense, but it's so beautiful. The music, the lighting, everything. I think there's so much style that in this movie that it
That
kind
maybe
of
the substance doesn't
covers
matter
up
as
for
much.
a lot of its plot holes and logic gaps.
Mhm.
Um, and I think one thing that really added to the film and gave it the film gravitas was Sean Connery. And even though he had a pretty small role, I think his appearance in the film really added something to it. And I think this was a time in Sean Connery's career where he was transitioning from leading man into sort of the older guy that was playing like more of the mentor role. But
Mhm.
I know in a few years he would like kind of swing back and become a leading man again. But any thoughts on Sean Connery as
He
Ramirez?
gave it some street cred. Like I felt
Mm-hmm.
like you needed that, and I think that's like the big takeaway for me. Like even having not watched it for a while, like I remember, you know, some of the set pieces, a couple of like you know moments up until I watched it recently. And he's one of those like staples of just being a part of, because he's selling the mythos, right? Like he's the person that's telling all
The
of
backstory.
the lore and you know the things that have happened, and hearing that voice telling you like you know you're immortal and you're not going to
Mm-hmm.
die, and the things that he's saying like have such weight to it. And I forgot what movie we were talking about recently, but I mentioned that there were like implications in the movie that made me think outside. I think it might have been Dark City, where it was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, these ideas make me think about what's happening outside of the film. And I think that's why like this franchise always stuck with me, because it's like, here's this guy who's like basically telling you a story, right? Like about this, like, you know, race, not race, but like, you know, group of people who can do unbelievable things. And, he sold that story, because like you need someone who's giving you that exposition to have that kind of like gravitas to
Gravitas.
just like, you want to listen to it. And I mean,
Mhm.
like Sean Connery is such like that voice, even like when he's like says Pandejo it's
Yeah.
awful, but you're
It
just
sounds
like,
terrible.
it's Sean Connery though. Like,
But mind you, he's not Spanish. He's Egyptian.
yeah.
Which
Yes.
I think is another thing that's really cool about the
Yeah,
character is he's kind of you get the backstory and the exposition, and he trains him a little bit. But he's also a cool character, right?
Yeah.
He is the head metallurgist for King, whoever the fucking Spain. He's over 2,000 years old, and you get the impression that he's been a scoundrel kind of throughout this time, right? Like a fun character that you would, if Connor doesn't have to win, I want him to win, right?
Yeah.
And even though he's only in it for a little bit, like you want to know more about him. I feel like he's almost like a Han Solo type, right? Where even though he's a little bit older, he looks like he knows how to fucking party and have a great time.
And that's the remake. That's the remake part of it, right? Like that's the franchise thinking. So what they do is, that'll be someone who gets like a prequel. Like it feels weird because Highlander is a franchise too.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think the great thing about Sean Connery, he's at least on camera, he seems all in. He's not just doing this for a paycheck, and it's not a lazy performance. I mean, him getting away dressed up in that outfit and not just like looking ridiculous, he really sells it. And
he kept calling him a peacock.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
He was calling him a haggis.
There's some fun stuff that happens in the movie. I think people forget how there's a lot of levity in the film in between all those like serious moments. And then speaking of serious moments, Clancy Brown, his performance also goes from really dark and to like kind of silly and ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I thought it really, that sort of amplified sort of performance really gave the film made it larger than life. But in watching it now, I kind of, some of the silly scenes kind of just stick out a little bit more than they used to when I was younger. But what do you think of Clancy Brown as the Kurgan?
Huge Clancy Brown fan.
Same.
Just in general, I just think he is always like steals a scene, and like anything is in. His voice is iconic. I just think he's like such a presence. The one thing that I didn't expect with watching this, and I always got the feeling from it, like that Terminator. Like he was just straight up.
Yeah,
he was just straight up like dressed like music. A punk. Yeah, like the music cues, how he like comes across.
Very rock and roll. And I think that Schwarzenegger was like a choice. I think they tried to cast him, and he felt it was too close.
I mean, there's even one part in the scene where he's walking through the hotel and he comes out of the elevator.
Yeah,
and you literally hear.
Yeah,
it's
like the way it's filmed is the exact same. It's like the tracking shot, like with him walking forward, and there's like someone else on the side, like in Terminator, there's a guy who's like, God damn. There's like another dude.
I mean, totally referring back to Terminator in with the Kurgan and how he's portrayed. But and Clancy Brown, I think like I guess watching John Wick 4 and seeing Clancy Brown in that universe, because the whole John Wick universe has like a kind of a Highlander kind of throwback element to it with this universe of hitmen and following these like special rules and everything. That's pretty cool. But Carlos, I want to ask you about, I feel like the weakest character in the movie and possibly the weakest performance was, as you were talking about, the love interest played by Roxanne Hart. But I feel that the movie just is able to overcome that. And because that is kind of shoehorned in, but I think the story and just all the magic that you've been being fed for like 90 minutes, you just kind of go with it.
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't feel very earned, the love story.
Yeah, and I also feel like it doesn't help the fact that every other female interaction that he had throughout the movie had more chemistry. I think he had more chemistry with the girl that he raised up to be his, I guess, secretary, the original love interest that he had back in the Highlands. I mean, it seemed like he even had a little bit more chemistry with that first girl he was in love with, who wanted to sing, kill him! Right? Like, why was she so mad? He must have done something to her, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, I don't know necessarily if that's even her fault. Individually, the performance, I think, was fine. She did okay with what was given to her. I think maybe it's just a question of the writing. And also, I don't know if I necessarily believed, not just the writing in terms of dialogue, but the choices that she made. She's like working for the police, but she doesn't tell them she makes a date with them. They have a weird interaction.
But she also has a book out.
She has a book
sword.
out.
Yeah, there's a lot of convenient plot points in the movie. Maybe she needed her own song, because you're right. Even like his love interest during the back when he was back in Scotland, she's only on camera for a couple of minutes.
But I follow the chemistry like way more. And again,
true.
you don't get to see her titties.
Yeah, but you know what happened when Christopher Lambert went to back to the village and she was all old and she was like, you got to do one thing for me. They didn't put it in the movie, but you know what she wanted.
What do you mean? He did light the candle.
No, she wants something else. They cut that one out.
Okay, all right.
That's a director's.
That was the director's cut.
Director's cut. Okay. And speaking of director, Russell Mulcahy. As I mentioned, he was a big music video director back in the 80s. He made one film before this, the horror movie Razorback in Australia. And even though he hasn't not gone on to do anything else that's been huge or impactful as Highlander, I feel he was the perfect director for this movie. Dash, your thoughts on just overall direction and because there's a lot of you feel the director's thumbprint and handprint all over this movie.
And I think that's the thing that was the thing that kept me seated, because the idea is kind of hokey, right? Like, and I feel like that's the issue that I have with Sword and Sorcery. A lot of the times it's like kind of like you can't put on like Masters of the Universe with your family and expect to be taken like seriously for the next like 2 hours. With this one, it like the choices that were made of like every time someone like Highlands up, they get that, the camera push in, the spotlight, the smoke, the way New York is filmed. I remember I watched it with my wife, and I was just like, I love how like old New York looked back in the day. Like it was just filmed in a great way.
Was that her first time watching the movie?
Yeah.
I'm curious every time I show this movie to a woman, they never seem to like give a fuck. So
well, it was mostly like
resonated with her.
The most of like the love stuff in the middle checked out. Like, when he's back at home, like back in the day, like, and there's a lot of it. Like I didn't remember there being that much back in the day. Like I remember it being flashbacks, and it was like, oh yeah, like this reminds him of that. I don't remember him like falling into the sea and then walking into the sea. Then he's in the village and he's spending. So like, a lot of that she was like kind of checked out, not really, paying attention. But some of that stuff stuck with me too, because in terms of the direction, like this was so far ahead of like medieval battle scenes are so normalized for us between Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings and Braveheart that I remember watching that first scene where they first meet. I was like, yo, this shit is like a fair amount of extras. Think about all like the wardrobe involved and
it was
the
like
story.
30 people. It was like 15 on 15, bro. But you're right about everything else. The wardrobe was cool.
But I'm saying the way that it was filmed, it felt hectic and chaotic. And I'm not saying it was like, because when I watch like Lord of the Rings, I'm like, cool, it's still 15 people just with like a million CG, and it looks like a million people. But I think like just the hiding of the limitations was just so well put together.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know if credit necessarily goes just to him, but also him and the cinematographer. But all of the tracking shots were amazing. There were cool shots where he's even when he's escaping Madison Square Garden, driving around in the car, how well that was shot. You're getting the way New York is filmed, I think kind of goes back to what we were discussing in episode 0 of the podcast, where it's just a certain look and feel, the neon against the everything's billowing with smoke. All of it just felt really good. Even though I thought the choreography was by and large terrible, the way it was shot, I don't know if they were taking more from the kung fu sword wuxia stuff, or maybe at the time there was a lot of ninja movies coming out of Asia. So I think a lot of those kind of tracking wide shots so you can kind of see the action and smoke around them, and they're covered in shadow, looked really great. At the same time, there's some ridiculous things going on, like why is this guy in Madison Square Garden backflipping through the parking lot for no reason? He just unlimited backflips, right? Like, also again, some things, and maybe this is a little bit nerdy.
Backflip? Because you can.
Because you can, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's fair.
But I like that he backflipped away from him and then he was looking for him.
Right.
I was like,
Not very practical.
You were the one who...
But again, this is where that music video director mentality comes in, where you're like, it's not practical, but it looks cool.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed too, and I'm not sure if this is just a connection that I'm making in my head or if it's real, but there's a shot at the very end, the final battle sequence between Kurgan and Connor, is after they've fallen through the top of the Silver Cup logo down into the like main floor, and then it's just a backdrop of all blue light. That I think that might have been the where in Kill Bill, you know, that famous scene where the bride is fighting the crazy 88s, and I think and the color kind of dissipates and all the black goes out. I think that's an exact almost copy. So I'm not sure if that was an influence or not, but I thought it was really cool when I looked at it. And also, one last thing I will say is one thing that I found that was interesting and unique is that there's a lot of shots of New York being completely empty, which I found weird. Like when he's walking to his shop on Hudson Street, there's just nobody in the sidewalks. When he's in McManus and he's coming out of there's nobody. When he's over by Madison Square Garden, there's nobody, which I'm not sure if it was a choice or if it was budgetary, but it definitely lended some weird like loneliness to a feeling of New York. And again, I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but it was an interesting choice. By and large, I really enjoyed the direction here, and not even just about the cinematography stuff, but some of the pacing I thought got long in the tooth, but somehow managed to kind of keep me connected, even though we're watching stuff like him walking underneath the water and stuff. The only thing that I had some issues with were a couple of breaks in logic, like
a couple,
you know, like his
you mean the movie
his
about
sword.
immortals that cut off each other's heads has
I mean,
some
yeah,
lapses
but
in
also
logic?
like I'm looking like it's as cool as it is that Kurgan's sword comes together in pieces. Like how does that work, right?
Yeah, it doesn't work, but it looks cool. Yeah, I think that's what you got. That's the mentality you got to go with. Yeah,
Yeah,
because that would you imagine that would just shatter into like a million pieces.
there's so many pieces for it to like break down. And then there's another cool scene that I thought was funny was Connor meets his friends on the bridge, right? And looks like they were friends for, you know, whatever, how many years, right? And he's like, oh man, you know, yeah, remember the last time we had a party? It was, you know, 200 years ago. And then there's a flashback. But the friend is not at that party in the flashback. So little things like that. But again, you're right. It's such a crazy, like, larger than life kind of story that you let it slide. I'm actually really surprised to hear that this director only had done one movie before, because it feels pretty slick. And you know,
have you ever been like, oh man, you remember you were at that thing? And they're like, I wasn't there.
That's fair.
Okay, well,
but I wouldn't agree.
It happens to immortals
he's
too.
an immortal. It's been a couple hundred years. You might forgot, you know.
I forgot what was at places last Friday. Let up
That's
200
fair.
years ago.
That's funny.
But again, I think Russell Mulcahy, even though he did one film, you could see the music video influence, and I think and then speaking of music video, we talked on the show about just sometimes we've called out some movies because they just seem to insert random tracks into a scene that doesn't quite seem to fit, or they don't really, the director or editor or whoever doesn't understand the vibe of the track and how to kind of match it. But I think I speak for all of us where this movie, where the visuals and the music just come completely together as one. And just, are you guys Queen fans? I'm curious because I was not a big Queen fan. This is pre like Wayne's World, and I think that's when a lot of people from our generation learned about Queen. But
yeah, I was gonna say exactly the same thing. I think that most people introduction from our generation was the Wayne's World scene, Bohemian Rhapsody specifically. But even as a kid, I loved this movie so much, and one of the things that I was in love with specifically was the music. So I was actually a Queen fan from this movie and not from Wayne's World, right? And it's an easy jump for a 7-year-old between, you know, what's the song called? Heroes of the Universe? What's the name of the?
Princes of the Universe.
Princes of the Universe to We Will Rock You, right? Like it's a easy. Another One Bites the Dust, right? Like it was a great place to start. So all I'm going to say is I think my favorite part of this movie in all is the music and the way it's also reflected in the directing. All hail Queen, and that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, Dash, Queen
Yeah,
fan?
I don't have much to add. Not a huge Queen fan outside of it, but you know the songs that I've heard, I loved, and I think that they do a really good partnership. That when movies use Queen songs, they just get bumped up a notch. Like
Well,
Flash Gordon, can't tell you that much about the movie. I haven't seen it since,
But-
however, but tell you about that theme though. Exactly.
Well, I think another thing that's really special about this movie and why the music works so well is apparently Russell Mulcahy made the movie, and then he showed it to Queen, and originally he wanted them to write one song for the movie,
which is that love
and then
theme.
every member of Queen ended up writing a song for the movie. So they ended up basically doing the entire soundtrack outside of the orchestral score. But that's why I feel the music and the music matches the film so well. Because normally, you don't have that. You just have like a pop song that's just like, especially in the 80s, they just kind of stick in a pop song during a montage and then try to release it as a single. But in this, like Who Wants to Live Forever and Princes of the Universe, and you just can't imagine those scenes without those songs. And that's why it's a suicide mission to try to remake this movie, because you can't use the Queen song. I'm assuming that a director remaking this film is not going to want to just recycle the songs again. So
Well, I mean, also the TV show
Queen
wound
is
up
just
using a lot of the Queen stuff.
identifiable with this movie. So I just don't know how you could do one without the other. I mean,
Well,
they even used the Queen song for the TV series.
That's what I'm saying. And more than just the Queen songs that are represented in the movie, there's other Queen songs that were used in the TV show. So there's kind of more stuff there that's already kind of pre-baked in that fits.
Yeah, but I think the
can't
time
imagine-
difference between the movie and the show being like 6 to 8 years, and then that difference being almost 40 years, I could see them wanting to look forward. But I just think about it'll be like the Billie Eilish version.
Well, no, I mean, I think there's other things in that same genre. I could imagine Muse, doing something like Radiohead or some other band that has been very much influenced by Queen, kind of doing something in that same respect.
You enjoy your Radiohead.
Yeah. I don't know Radiohead and Highlander, but
AMC.
maybe we'll be surprised. So obviously this movie spawned an entire franchise across films, shows, all that kind of stuff. Did you guys see any of the sequels? I mean, Carl, you mentioned you saw the show, but did you guys see any of the sequels, the cartoons, play any of the games, read any of the books?
I watched a little bit of the show, random episodes. I'm pretty sure I saw. I think Highlander Endgame maybe was one of them when it came out. Completely not memorable. I don't know if I just don't remember much of it, so I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. But aside from that, I haven't been keeping up with the. I didn't know that there were books.
I was fully versed in the law to the extent that I was a big fan of not only all the TV shows. I think I might have even bought the entire run of the TV show on DVD, and the spin-offs. And I played the video game. I'm sorry. I don't think there was a video game, but I was going to say, and I watched the cartoon. So yeah, I was all in on it, and of course, some of it was better than others. But actually, the TV show, I would say, had some elements of it that were actually better than any of the movies. Adrian Paul as a lead is actually a martial artist, so a lot of that choreography got a lot better. And they, with a lot more time to expand on a character's life, the character development was there. The cartoon sucked. The cartoon was terrible, and the movies subsequently were all pretty bad. Although I would say the final one had a special place in my heart because
The Source.
It was a crossover.
Oh, that's not the final one. The final one was called The Source, which is more like a sequel to the show, and it was terrible.
Okay, well, the final one that
and
I
it was
saw
directed by the guy that directed Brett Leonard did Highlander. I mean, Lawnmower Man.
Really? Okay,
But it was awful.
My last one that I
He's like, did I tell you it wasn't good yet?
But yeah, they had one where it was a crossover between, and Christopher Lambert was in it, and so was Adrian Paul. And it was terrible, other than the fact that it was cool to have a crossover between the two worlds, even though ostensibly it's one world. But to answer your question, yeah, I was Highlandered out, man. The whole law, everything I could get on it, and I loved it, and I still do.
I only went as far as the films, and the sequels, like the second one, I could appreciate for its style, but it takes a complete left turn.
And Michael Ironside.
Yeah, Michael Ironside is hilarious in the movie, but it just completely abandons the myth, because Dash.
He's the last one.
In the sequel, in Highlander 2, it's revealed that they're actually aliens from another planet that
No
got their
way.
memories wiped, and that's why they're immortal. It makes no fucking sense.
And if you kill one, instead of getting the quickening, you can make a wish like a Dragon Ball and wish your guy back to life.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. That's how Sean Connery just kind of comes back. And the third one is basically like a cheap Canadian shot version of the first one, and it loses all its magic and style. Fourth one is Endgame, which is a crossover between Lambert and Adrian Paul. And the fifth one, the Source, that went straight to Sci-Fi Channel. And it was just
so it has to be good.
Terrible. It's fucking. They don't even have flashbacks in the movie. It's just I don't know because I didn't watch the show. I only saw a couple episodes, so I didn't know what the hell was going on. But this is a franchise where there should have literally have been only one. And I don't know.
I see what you did there. And if they made it in Mexico, there could have been only Juan.
Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. Look at Antonio Banderas as Connor Ramirez. How about that?
There we go.
Okay. Favorite scene from the movie?
The open, man. Like, yeah. Once I put it on, first off, the DVD menu or the 4K disc menu, fire. It looks cool. It's like real cool graphic. But the opening of the movie is where it grabs. It has amazing shots with the, I guess I was trying to think about how they filmed it because it wouldn't have been on a drone, but when they're in Madison Square Garden, probably a camera on like some sort of like string or something like that because it's flying around the arena really
that was
dynamic.
Such a great shot. And then zooms in on his eyes when he's looking at it.
Really dope dynamic shots. Completely sets up what you're about to see for the movie without any words. It's just Christopher Lambert looking fucking stoic as fuck while everyone's wilding out, and you get like your first taste of just the stylistic choices of the way he's lit, and he's like mostly in shadow, but you can see his eyes. And then you go into the parking lot where you have this fight scene, and it really gave that feeling. They said it at the beginning of the movie in the title graphics where they said they talk about the war, and they said no one has ever known we were among you until now. Yeah. And you're seeing that play out at the parking lot under this event where there's two fights happening. There's like a metaphor going on with that, and I just thought that was such a strong open to the movie, and it had like really cool shots in it too, like the way that the camera moves in it is fire. But then, Carlos, you talked about it earlier, that it starts to set up these rules. I love my rules in movies, and they start to set up like how powerful the swords are. The sparks come from that people can move in the way that you're not expecting them to. So I think like just in terms of your first introduction in the movie, they hit you with so much new information that everything that you see is like, all right, I'm in. You're in a parking lot. All right, I'm in. This guy can do backflips. You're like, all right, I'm in. And it just keeps going into these like cool moments that it just felt like when someone was putting it together, they're like, it would be cool. It would be cool. And then when you watch the scene to start a movie with that, you're like, fuck yeah, this is really cool.
So I'm a little tight. You took my you took my pick, Dash. But I think a close second for me is going to be the scene where Sean Connery bites it in that mountain on that like castle thing, which also I'm not sure did Connor build that for them or did he just find the castle? I don't know, it doesn't matter, but you finally get to see how powerful the villain is based against the context of the master getting killed by him. You also get to see him kind of protecting his friend protecting the woman, but it doesn't work out. There's lightning. He stabs him. He fucking spits in his face, which was gangster. You find out that he was the one who cut Krogan's face to make that scar or whatever. So I thought that was really cool as a secondary scene. But I also just want to throw in as a new one to shoot punch kick first. My least favorite scene. And I was actually really, really disappointed by the final quickening. When he finally kills Krogan and he gets the gift, I just didn't understand what the fuck I was looking at. There were dragons coming in and out of them. Well, they were saying like weird words.
Have you listened? There's a reason for that. Have you listened to the director's commentary by any chance?
No, I didn't. So please,
apparently, what happened because they had wires suspending Christopher Lambert.
And you could see the wires.
Well, they were trying to cover it up with all that crazy shit going on, and obviously, you could still see the wires because this is the pre-CGI time. Okay. So that was one of the reasons why they had all that crazy thing. Some of that the lightning bolts and
Because it
everything
just
like
didn't make
that.
sense again, to your point with the rules. Like, they didn't really set anything aside. In the TV show, they speak a little bit more about what the quickening is,
Yeah.
and there's some more guidelines about that. One thing I think it's interesting that I thought was in this movie, but I guess it must be from the show, is that the amount of power you get from killing another immortal is based on how powerful that immortal is. So theoretically, if you're like the older you are and the more immortals you've killed, the more powerful you are. So you could start off as like a rookie, and if you manage to take a head off of like someone who's been around a long time, you get more power based on that. So I was thinking maybe it had something to do with that, like his demons going into him or something. But I don't know. I didn't get it, and it was really anticlimactic for me.
Well, my favorite scene is actually the montage of Who Wants to Live Forever, where we see his wife aging and dying. It's
Really?
such
I
a
wouldn't have
powerful
thought that.
scene, and the music, yeah, that just has that
Really, I thought you were colder hearted
that
than
has
that. I
to
didn't
feel.
realize that you
I
had
am,
emotions.
but that really touches
you?
me.
Love is a
Really?
real character in this film.
But speaking of your second favorite scene, Carlos, I love that scene and just how old school it's shot. But speaking of logic gaps, like why number one, a lot of people ask where was he when this was going on, and why the fuck would you leave your wife alone with Sean Connery in your house?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
He was saying some flirty shit though too. He was telling us some of the
sexiest
flirty
man
stories.
alive, right? Back in the day. I don't know
Yeah,
about
that's
that.
true.
That's probably the most egregious
I hadn't
thing
considered
that,
that.
Connor McLeod did.
What'd you think about Clancy Brown in the fight scene
Church?
where he fights his Blacklander dude in the
In the
alley?
alleyway.
Yeah.
Well, that's an example of just some of the ridiculousness in the movie where they just cut to this like survivalist living in Manhattan for some reason, driving around
Yeah.
with guns in his back seat.
I
And he
love
happens to stumble upon a fight between two guys in an alleyway.
That was crazy. At
yeah,
first, I wasn't sure. Like, I didn't know if he was an immortal, but his thing was guns. But then I was like, oh, he's just a dude.
Yeah, just a regular guy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and then he rips
With the Uzi.
he rips the top of that convertible.
Yes.
And then drives the grandma around.
Yeah,
I thought some of that scene was a little too overshot because it has my favorite shot in the whole movie, which is when the camera pushes into Clancy Brown, where
it's the white of his eyes and stuff.
Yeah,
and,
but then you know what they do? They cut to like a wide shot, and you see like the pimps and the sex workers like their point of view seeing him, and it looks weird where it's just some guy like down in an alley with a light on him, like with his arms out.
Yeah.
So I thought that took away some of the magic, but that shot of Clancy Brown is so dope. Like I know they put it in the trailer. I was like, I want to watch this
another
immediately.
example of one of those fictitious New York City alleyways that don't exist.
Yeah. I also really liked him in the church. First of all, because I know that church too. That's still a place. I don't know if I showed you pictures when I went to that candlelight string quartet in this really old church in Brooklyn. That's that same church. So it was really nice to be like, oh, that's cool to see. But also, I thought that one interaction that they had, is that the only more than 30-second interaction that Connor has with Clancy Brown's character?
Except for like when they first meet in battle and he gets stabbed.
Oh yeah.
But even that, he just stabbed him and then got pulled over. He didn't really they didn't talk.
Yeah, they didn't talk.
But they did it. That was really good. Like, again, back to chemistry. That was a good scene where I felt like both of them. I don't know. I just really enjoyed the back and forth in there. So special shout out to special mention.
Yeah,
to that scene.
and you know what? Even though like you're mentioning all these scenes, and a lot of these would fit perfectly in a superhero movie, but I never got that feeling in this with this film that it sort of followed any of those conventions of like someone discovers their superpowers and blah blah blah. And I guess that I don't know what that, to me it just has its own kind of vibe, but I wouldn't fit this, even though technically I guess you could fit this in sort of a superhero genre. I just feel like it stands apart from those types of stories. Which
I think the great thing with this one is like the way that it could like it does feel like a blend. So the fight scenes and like where they meet up with people feel very superhero-esque, but I feel like it feels very horror-y because it goes very in line with the vampires, like you were saying earlier. But then also, if you look at Clancy's part, like the way Terminator is essentially like a slasher movie, like he is kind of presented a little bit as a slasher type because there's, some big deaths in the movie that resonate with Christopher Lambert. And they all happen at the hands of Clancy. So he's like kind of going through, by the end of the movie, all of these people, if he, his girl is now in jeopardy, so killed his mentor, he's killing the military guy, like doing all these different killings. So they really have him as like this one menace, where generally superhero movies, they're just more reliant on set pieces, where this movie had set pieces, but it was very like personal between.
And he's singing New York, New York.
Yes, Freddie Mercury singing New York, which that's not yet been released yet. That's in the Queen vaults. But I think another aspect of it, again, why I love this movie, and even though I don't like sword and sorcery, is all the extra shit that Russell Mulcahy throws on top of it. Because when they're doing the sword battle, it's not just they're just clanking swords. It's all the electricity that kind of makes no sense, but I guess you just go with it. You say it's their Highlander, the immortal energy. And then just everything that's going around them. It's almost like a musical because there's so much spectacle happening that you don't normally see in a sword and sorcery movie, where it's just two guys like battling out and they're maybe sweating. But with that all said, obviously, this movie was a big bomb when it came out, and it only really got discovered through VHS and television and really gained that cult following. So let's go into the critical reaction. On Rotten Tomatoes, it gets a 69% fresh, and an audience score of 79%. So this is obviously not a one for the critics, it's one for the fans. On IMDb, it gets a 7 out of 10. On Letterboxd, it gets a 3.3 out of 5. And critic reviews at the time, they really dismissed the movie. They were confused by it. They thought it was silly. And the New York Times, Walter Goodman at that time, he says, this was a bad review. Because a lot of the good reviews and bad reviews are kind of mixed together. But he said, since none of the characters make sense, even on the movie's own terms, Highlander keeps exploding for almost 2 hours with nothing at stake. A more positive review from the Daily Telegraph, they said, made with such super style, Highlander does have entertainment value, but this can only be a one-off. So prophetic. But the fans, again, love this movie. So I went to IMDb. I found the two most recent reviews of Highlander, although, it is also a mixed bag. First one from Arian Evans says, love this as an 80s kid, but it is not a good movie. This is a 1 out of 10 review. And he said, 8 out of 10 by 8-year-old 1980s me. Unfortunately, I'm not 8 years old anymore, and neither is this 1 out of 10 star movie. Watch this again in 2024 to evaluate whether or not it's a classic worthy of watching with my son. He doesn't enjoy most old movies, and I empathize. Streamed this one in the background while working and was hoping it would provide inspiration, some excitement, or at least decent distraction. Nope. Ouch. Okay, but this
seems like I was watching it while doing something else.
Right, yeah, you can't do that. This is not that kind of movie.
That's what I think exactly is what happened with
this is not that kind of movie. You got to sit and watch it.
You got to buckle in.
Yeah. Okay, but this is a 9 out of 10. And this was posted in September. It says, one of the best films of the 80s by Ericster17. Okay, forget the stunt casting of Sean Connery as a Spanish Egyptian and a Frenchman as a Scot. If you can believe in immortal warriors fighting through time, then an accent is the least of your concerns. So many nitpickers around here. Get a sense of humor and an imagination. This film is a masterpiece. All right. So let's get into our ratings. Carlos.
So again, it is. I'm gonna go with the conglomerate of the two scores from the two viewings that I saw most recently, and I am gonna give this a 3.5. Only ones that there can be out of 5.
Okay. 3.5 out of 5.
I want to say though, my second viewing was definitely a 4, but the first one was like a 2.
Damn,
it was like really, really bad. So in my heart, it's a 4, but my head is telling me 3.5.
I like this movie a lot. I think that what it did that I enjoyed, I loved. But I think I didn't remember there being like a pretty big lull in the middle of the movie where I just wanted to see him do things that a Highlander would do. And I spent a little bit too much time waiting to get back to those moments. But this movie is stylish as fuck. I really had a great time watching it, and I'm gonna give this 3.5 manners of a goat out of 5.
Oh,
Okay.
haggis.
Wow. So for me, I guess my rating system on this podcast is based on how many times I've returned and rewatched the movie, and I think that is probably a better measure of whether you love a movie or not. Because you could watch something once, it's a great movie, but never see it again. And I don't know if you can consider that a great movie for yourself, right? So this movie I watch several times a year. I have it in the background, like when I'm working once in a while. So I'm going to give this 4 and a 5 ex-girlfriends accusing me of being in league with the devil out of 5.
Wow.
League with Satan.
And
Awesome.
if you listen, and also this has one of the best director commentaries
I might
that
do
I've
that.
ever heard.
That's
So
definitely worth
listen to
a
it.
look. Yeah,
Because
he
he explains all the little tricks and things that he did and things that you didn't even notice in the film, like the use of miniatures, like at the ending. When Connor McLeod is on like the rooftop and you see like a train behind him, that's actually just a miniature like being moved in the background. So just some fantastic stuff if you're into that stuff.
I'm into it.
All right. Well, okay. So Dash, you're up for the next episode.
Cool. So next week we will be watching the Roland Emmerich movie, and Jean-Claude Van Damme will be making his second appearance on the Shoot Punch Kick podcast. We'll be talking about Universal Soldier.
All right.
Does he do a split in this one? Let me guess. Yes.
You gotta tune in next. Tune into the next episode.
The world doesn't end yet,
we
right?
talk
Even
about
though
it.
this is
No, but
an
I
early
think-
Roland Emmerich movie before he got his
So
niche.
you know what? We this will be 2 shoot Van Damme movies. I think that the next Van Damme movie after this one should be a kick one.
Oh, okay.
Remember we were having that
Okay.
discussion, right,
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
2 different versions or whatever. So I mean, you said you're mostly a shoot Van Damme guy, right?
Yeah. You might have to nominate. You
Yeah,
might have
like
to pick one of
Bloodsport or
your
All
kicky
right,
jams.
Carlos, either one.
Good call.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into 80s and 90s cinematic violence. Tully, Dash, and Carlos, see you next time at Shoot Punch Kick.
But goddamn.